I love supply chain. And if you're like me, you've been hearing a lot of news about supply chain, particularly around the English language proficiency for CDL drivers and non domiciled CDL holders. We'll talk about that, but we're going to focus our attention today on the tip of the spear, truck driving schools. Let's get into it. Now, the English language proficiency sounds novel. There's been this requirement recently that you must be able to communicate with law enforcement and read stop signs and different signs on the roads. This English language proficiency is a new phenomenon, not exactly. English language proficiency has been on the book since the 1930s. See, it's about safety, and you need to be able to understand instructions from law enforcement and to read traffic signs. Nothing novel about this. However, there is an interesting piece that it's now an out of service failure. So if you don't satisfy English language proficiency, you're out of luck. You have to get a different driver to come and move that load. We'll talk more about that here in a minute. The other big news story is about this thing called non-domiciled CDLs. The idea is people who are domiciled in a foreign country who then come to the United States and drive a truck. There's about 200,000 non-domiciled CDL holders, and the FMCSA has put out an interim final rule looking to get rid of a vast majority of them, maybe up to 90, maybe 95% of all non-domiciled CDL holders. All very interesting, all very worth understanding. But again, this is about truck driving schools. Now, to get a truck driving school started, you have to follow the FMCSA's guidance and get registered as a training provider within their infrastructure. How does one become a training provider? Well, that's a great question. It involves the organizations doing something close to self-certification, self-attestation, they call it, where you fill out some forms and you submit them to the government, and they then come back and say, hey, you are ready to go. And these truck driving schools are also regulated by the states. We see a lot of this in the news around California, Washington, Illinois, Texas, Florida, everywhere. This is how you get a CDL. You go to a school that's in your state that has filled out the proper forms, and then you're off to the races. Now, how many of these schools are there? Well, the numbers vary, but as of 2025, there's over 20,000 registered truck driving schools, over 38, maybe 40,000 locations. But there's a lot of drivers getting produced in the United States every year. How many, do you ask? How about 450,000 CDLs are issued every single year through a vast network of all of these schools? How many drivers do we have in the United States? The numbers vary. Sometimes people have a CDL and they're not driving, but the general understanding is over 3.5 million. 3.5 million people with CDLs moving all of the things that you own. If it came on a box, or came on a trailer, came on a truck, that's how it gets to you. So if it's at your doorstep or if it's on the shelf at the store you're visiting, chances are very good that it came on a truck. But let's talk about those schools, these self-certified schools. How many hours do you need to drive? How much training do you have in order to move that 80,000 pound machine? Would it surprise you that it's about a month? That's right. On average, it's about 160 hours of training, essentially a month. Sometimes you can do it faster. There are some programs in the United States you can do it in 120, 140 hours. Some places have a higher degree of training. We might do 200 hours. But this profession is interesting. You have a month of training with a self-certified school, and then you're off to the races. We can look and say, well, this non-domiciled CDL, that's the real issue for safety in the supply chain. Or we could say, maybe it's actually about these people who can't speak English. That's the issue in the supply chain. I would posit a different theory. I think we have low barriers to enter ashore, but we also have a failure of the regulators. This is the big challenge that we see on the brokerage industry. If you're a freight broker and all you do is rely on the FMCSA for whether or not this motor carrier is a good partner to have, you will fail. You can't do it. You have to use a magnitude more of different services in order to figure out if this motor carrier can actually do the thing they say they can do. But let's talk about what I really care about: maintenance, repair. Now, I know that if you are watching the news every single day, you go, oh my goodness, this person was unqualified to operate that truck. Who put them behind the wheel? Who gave them a license? Who tested them? But did you know that 1 in 5 commercial vehicles is unsafe at any speed? The national out of service rate for commercial vehicles is over 20%. 20% of all vehicles on the road right now, as you're driving, would not meet the bare minimum safety qualities the FMCSA has established. These companies that do stuff that you go, they're hiring unqualified drivers. They have people that aren't professionals. They're the ones who are also circumventing these regulations on maintenance and repair. And you can tell a lot about a company by how they maintain their equipment. 20%, 20%, 20% of all vehicles are unsafe. About 5.5% of all drivers are not qualified. That's the national out of service rate for drivers. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, sure, the schools set themselves up. They fill out a form and the government stamps it. And these people are trained for 160 hours. And sure, the vehicle maintenance isn't great. 20% out of service isn't amazing. 5% for drivers, not terrific, but probably they have enough insurance if something goes wrong. Maybe they do. Let me disabuse you of that perception. No, my friends, the minimum insurance required to operate that 80,000-pound machine with somebody who's only been trained for 1 month is $750,000. That sounds like a lot of money. It does. It feels like a lot of money, $750,000. But did you know that that number was established in the 1980s and never tied to inflation? Had that number been tied to inflation, the liability insurance for a non-hazardous freight would likely be above $3 million. How many motor carriers do you think carry $3 million in liability insurance? There's a lot of big ones that certainly have far more than that. If you're a small owner operator or trucking fleet with less than 10 trucks, you're probably not carrying much beyond $1 million unless your customers require it. So there you have it. A breakdown, a walkthrough, a little journey down the world of transportation and logistics. Yes, there are folks who cannot speak English on our highways. We should not have them on the highways. Sure, there's non-domiciled CDL holders who fought this idea of a driver shortage and we needed to have more meat in the grinder. But behind the scenes, when you peel back the layers, you see what's really at stake. 20,000 truck driving schools that require only 160 hours of training, putting out 450,000 drivers a year. And we have only 450,000 new ones, as many leave the business entirely for wages and safety and all number of things. We won't talk about all the other things about truck driving at the moment. We'll continue a little series on these little vignettes, I think, for all of you. But hopefully you see a different perception. It's not all about English language and non-domiciled CDLs. There is something deeply rotten about America's supply chain. And that is the quality of the maintenance and repair of our commercial vehicles, the amount of self-certification we see in this industry leaves a big gap, and that gap is ever growing. So as you see the news and you see the flashes in the pan, remember, 1 in 5 vehicles on the road right next to you is unsafe at any speed. We all want to get home in the same condition that we left. That's the promise of the American supply chain. Whether that promise can be kept is up for interpretation.